Hi guys, let's dive into underwriting, one of the most important parts of a lending business. Remember, you always need your underwriting hat on. I know that you're going to want to do every deal that comes across your plate, and you try to figure out ways to make the deals work, which is good. You need to be creative, but wear your underwriting hat at all times. You need to make sure you're making good financial decisions on behalf of your own money and on behalf of your private investor capital. So let's dive in. Got a good amount to go through related to the underwriting segment. So underwriting starts when the valuation payment comes in. And what do I mean by that? So while you were originating the deal and getting the deal, these potential borrowers to commit, as soon as they commit, meaning, yeah, I want to proceed, you collect the $400 from them. Now you can collect whatever you want. In our business, we collect $400 from them. We call it a valuation fee. It's a little bit of money to send either an appraiser or an inspector out to double check, obviously to take some pictures of the property for you, and also to double check the construction, the scope of work, to make sure that they're able to accomplish it based on their budget. When you're starting out, go to every property yourself. You need to be the expert. You need to learn the areas. You need to know exactly what you're looking at. So get your eyes on every single property. And it also makes sense to either send probably a local real estate agent out as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be an appraiser, a local real estate agent or investor, somebody to help you value these properties if you need help valuing these properties. But you should be going out there themselves. So part of the fee that we collect obviously is to cover the cost of that, but more importantly, it gives the client, the borrower, a financial commitment to proceed, because that's important. They feel locked in. So underwriting officially starts, let's just say, when they commit, but as we talked about in the origination and the scripting section, it overlaps a lot. So okay, they proceed, they pay the $400, it's ready to go. All right, so let's talk about deal types that you're going to do in the hard money lending model. Now, obviously, you can do a bunch of different types of deal types, but what we focus on and what I'd encourage you to focus on is the investment residential stuff. So a few different types of deals. The fix and flip, so someone buys a property, they need some acquisition money and construction money, or they buy a property and maybe they just need the acquisition money, or someone owns a free and clear rental property and you give them some sort of cash out or bridge loan on that. So that's the investment residential stuff. We don't do any primaries, no primaries, no primaries. You don't want to deal with any consumer lending, investment residential, and also some commercial stuff. So commercial stuff that you can wrap your brain around, some small apartment buildings, some office, some retail, things like that. We're a little bit more conservative on those because we base everything off of a 30-day resale value to determine how quick the property will sell, how quick we can get our money back if something goes bad. And commercial properties obviously have a longer shelf life than residential. So stick to what you kind of know. When you start off, if you don't know commercial at all, just stick to these investment residential properties. They're pretty easy. So those are the deal types. All right, so let's jump into the way we underwrite. We call it the 4 C's. You might have heard that before. We didn't make up the 4 C's, but we follow it pretty religiously because it's important. So collateral, obviously the most important part. I'm going to dive into all of these. We're going to go through all the 4 C's real quick, and then I'm going to jump back into collateral because the majority of this is related to the collateral, to make sure you're properly valuing these assets to make sure it's a good one. So we're gonna come back to collateral, okay? Of how we structure these loans, but let me just kind of go through all 4 of these real quick. So obviously the collateral is most important, then the character. So what do we talk about with character? Okay, is the borrower easy to communicate with? If you call them, do they have a good attitude? Does this seem like it's someone who you want to partner with? Now keep in mind, if you're lending money to somebody, you're partnering with them for the most part. You want to, the deal's not paid off and matured until they pay the money back, right? Yeah, you make some money on the front end for writing the loan to them, but this isn't like being a mortgage broker where you get paid and then you're out. You're living with these people through the expectancy of this entire deal. You're collecting monthly payments from them. You're talking to them regularly, so you need to make sure they obviously have good character. If they show up, do they show up to the meeting with you on time? Do they meet you at the property? Are they easy to communicate with? Do they understand the business? Character is so important. I mean, think of them as a business partner. How would you underwrite a business partner if you went and worked with them? What are questions that you'd ask them? Character is so freaking important. These are in order of importance. Character is more important than anything, obviously, besides the collateral. So I don't want to have to emphasize that so much, but the character of the borrower is so important. Now, capacity. Do they have the ability to do this project? Do they have the down payment? Let's say they need 20% down, and they need 20 grand. Do they have the $20,000? Can they make the monthly payments? Do they have an exit strategy to repay the loan? What's their capacity in this project? Do they have the ability to do that, or does someone have the ability inside this project that you're funding to be capable of executing, the execution part? I mean, deals that go bad in this business are the borrowers that can't properly execute, right? It doesn't matter kind of how good the collateral is. The ones that go bad are, they cannot execute. So the capacity, do they have the ability to do that? And obviously credit. Credit's not everything, but it tells a story. There is a very large indicator that anyone who has lower credit and has a big construction project is going to default. That typically is what happens. And probably the reason that is we know with big construction projects, or any construction project, but the bigger the construction project, the more someone is going to go over budget. And then if they don't have great credit, they don't have the ability or the capacity to go and try to get additional lines of credit or figure out other ways to come up with money. So credit, it's the lowest on the 4 C's, but it's still important. It paints the picture. I will tell you that most of the borrowers we work with have good credit, 680 plus, or we require them to have a co-borrower. Now that's not 100% set in stone. Obviously, if someone comes to us and we're at a 30, 40, 50 LTV and they have lower credit, that's okay. But I will tell you that we're not lending up to 65 LTV if someone's got bad credit, unless they have a co-borrower that has good credit. So we do adjust our risk based off of that. So, okay, so hopefully you got the character, capacity, credit. Let's go back to collateral, because that is obviously the most important part. If the collateral is not good and the collateral doesn't work, then the deal's obviously dead. It doesn't work. So, okay, so as we discussed, we lend up to 65% of the after repair value. Okay, so you have an asset, let's say real easy, it's worth $100,000 after repair value. We'll lend up to $65,000, right? Which is 65%. That is 65% equity. So a 65%, 35% equity cushion. Now I will tell you from experience that 35% equity cushion gets eaten up very, very quickly if a deal starts going into default. That's why we lend 65%. That 35% equity cushion gets eaten up very, very quickly. So just because you're lending 65 LTV, if a borrower doesn't execute and you take that property back, there's no additional spread. You're barely breaking even. The reason that is let's say they start missing payments, right? So that's 65, and let's say whatever, their payment's $1,000 a month and they're 5 or 6 months back. So 65 automatically turns into 70. Then you have attorney fees. Attorney fees are gonna be $10,000 anyway you look at it. It just is what it is. It's gonna be $10,000. I know there's foreclosure mills and foreclosure houses that do stuff for a few $1,000s, and that does happen sometimes. But between auctioneer fees and additional stuff, it just ends up being about $10,000. So that 65 turned into 70, now turns into 80. Now let's be honest. When you have a property that is neglected and someone doesn't want to mess with and is walking away from something, it needs deferred maintenance on it. The value is decreasing. So there's additional costs on that. You have selling costs. There's a lot of things. Let me get this to wipe this off. There's a lot of things that eat up on that. So there's a reason we lend at that 65 LTV. As a newer hard money lender, I would be ultra cautious and probably even lend less than that. Probably lend closer to like 60%. Now I will tell you, if you're in a market that has higher loan amounts, that percentage helps a lot more. And because a lot of as you can see, there's a big difference between doing a loan for $65,000 on $100,000 and doing a loan of $190 on $300, which is the same LTV. You have $110,000 spread here, 35% equity spread here. So think about that as you're doing that. For instance, 190, let's say, goes really bad. They don't make payments. They're out of it for a year. They'll make payments for a year. Your attorney costs are super high. You have to act on a judgment, and these are all things we're going to talk about. Act on a judgment, and the payoff ends up being like 50 grand higher. Well, you're at 240 on 300. 50 grand higher on this, you're way underwater. So it doesn't work as well. So just keep that in mind, as you're doing loans. So, okay, so 65 LTV, you're doing a loan of 65%. Now keep in mind, in order for this borrower to get a loan of 65, you need to obviously have a good piece of collateral, which you do. They need to have good character, they need to have good credit, and they need to have the ability to do this deal. They need to have the capacity with the skin in the game, the execution, be able to make monthly payments to do that. If not, lower your exposure. If you're coming from the mortgage world and you're used to having, yep, this is our metrics, we can lend up to 65 LTV as long as you have a 680 credit score, that's not the world we live in. You make the decision on every deal. A partner in your company or principal in your company or you or somebody higher level in this business that you're creating needs to be making these decisions of how much to lend on, what the value of the property is, and what you're comfortable lending. We quote on the street that we lend up to 65 LTV based off of the after repair value, which is 100% true. But in order to get that, they need to have good credit, they need to have proper financials, meaning they have the ability to do this. And they probably need some experience in order. It also needs to be in a neighborhood that's very, very easy to justify that $100,000 value. So there's nothing wrong with going back to somebody and saying, hey, we're only comfortable lending 40 on this deal. We do it all the time. And you're not being shady or you're being a snake on that. That's just what you're comfortable lending on that deal. So let's talk about these ARVs and these values to begin with. I've told this story, you probably heard this before. If I flip the house, if Chris flips a house, if you flip a house, if James over here flips a house, we're all gonna sell it for a different price. Every single person executes a little bit differently. Now they may be close prices, they may be far prices. Personally, I flipped a lot of houses and I'm a much better lender than I am a flipper. My attention to detail on some of that stuff just doesn't work. I'm just not as passionate at flipping houses as I am on lending it. You, on the other hand, might be a great flipper. You know exactly what to put in there. You know what coats of paint to put in there. You know what appliance package is. We have so many investors that come to us on a regular basis, and they're emotional about the transaction, and they think they're going to sell it as high as these big rehabbers that are doing 100 flips a year are, and that's just not going to be the case. And they're going to get hit the hard way on that by thinking their property is worth 110 when it probably is only worth 100, maybe even 90. So typically, what I like doing is I usually call it like the 10% variance. So you have a very definable approach of like, hey, there's a good chance this thing sells for 100. If it's a huge, really good rehabber, maybe they sell for 110. Somebody just starting out, maybe be at 90. So you're adjusting your LTV based on how well you believe that person's going to execute. And you're unsure, lower your exposure. There's always a number that works on all of these deals. There's always a number that works. But I'm going to get in this last section. We're going to hop on my computer and I'm going to show you how we comp properties and how I determine values. And some neighborhoods are easy, some neighborhoods aren't. Think about this. You're driving around and you're driving in, think about this in your town. So you're driving down the highway and there's a street and they built this community, right? And this community has 100 houses in it. And maybe there's 3 styles. Maybe there's a colonial, split level, and a Cape Cod, right? The colonial sell for 300, the Cape Cod sell for 250, the split levels sell for 260 or whatever, right? All these are nice. They all sell right here. And then you have a house on this double yellow line that was there for a long time, and it's a Cape Cod. And then there's another one, and it's a colonial. And they're unique houses, and these are all built in, let's just say, the 50s or the 60s. Most areas have something like this. And then these were built in like the 90s, let's call it, or whatever, say maybe 60s to 70s. These were in the 90s. Well, chances are this particular Cape Cod here, exact same square footage as this Cape Cod right here, is probably not worth the same. This is inside a community. There might be a homeowners association on it. This one sits on a double yellow line. It's a different type of property. You got to understand and learn how to comp and how to value some of these things. These houses, let's say there's 100 houses in this community, are very, very, very easy to value, right? typically, if you do a radius search, and I'll show you, we do polygon searches, we do radius searches, we do, depending on if you're in a city, sometimes we do 0.1 miles. If you're in a big rural area, sometimes we do up to a mile. I like to do somewhere around a quarter to 0.33 of a mile. So let's say you can pull this entire subdivision. In this entire subdivision, you get, let's say, 15 properties that have sold over the last, ideally 3, 4, 5 months, maybe 6 months, type of thing. That's a good enough base to work off of. And I'm going to show you all this as we do the comping section. But with that, you can determine which values and which property types, bedrooms and baths, you're basing off of. The ones on these double yellow lines get a little bit tricky. So what I like to do is just do my best to try to figure out whatever value I'm comfortable with, maybe lower it a little bit, and then base it off of that. So think about that inside your community. Obviously, let's say you do a lot of stuff in a big city and there's a lot of high-rise condos. Well, you might be in a building with 100 units or a few hundred units, and those are typical. Obviously condos are a different animal because you have your condo association and your taxes that you have to think about. I'm not a big fan of lending on condos that have higher than a $300 a month condo association fee, and if you get into high-rise condos with elevators, typically those can be upwards of $1,000. So I don't love doing those, but when you're in an area that has a lot of the same types of properties to look at, it's simple. Suburbia is very easy to comp. When you're in any major city, sometimes it's block by block, so you got to be cautious. And when you're starting out, be as cautious as possible until you fully understand those areas. It's your job to learn these areas, and it's your job to take use your resources from your local MLS, from real estate agents, from other investors, from appraisers, and compile it so you can kind of make up in your mind what you believe based on how well that borrower is going to execute what you want to lend them. Everything is based on how well you believe. Remember, this is your money or the money from private investors that you're controlling. How well you believe the person's going to execute and what you believe the value is, and then you're going to base everything else off of that. So I know that's new to a lot of people because, in the world of of banking and being a mortgage broker or just thing in general, they use the term appraisal. Appraisals mean nothing to us. We don't really care what that appraisal is. If you use the term appraisal to me, what that's pretty much stating is, great, I'm going to reach out to an appraiser and figure out what their opinion is of value, and then I'm going to take that value and I'm going to dissect it, or I'm going to take I'm going to take the data they give me and I'm going to dissect it based on what I want it for, and I'm going to use it as a research point. So we never base things off what an appraisal. I'm not just ordering an appraisal. We're not just taking money, ordering an appraisal, and say, oh, cool, whatever the appraiser comes in, we're lending at 65 LTV. That's not what we're doing at all. Whatever, and don't get me wrong, sometimes we'll get appraisals, sometimes we'll get valuations. I'll tell you in this section how we do it, what third-party resources we use to help us with that. But what we're doing is we're taking that data and we're compiling it, not into anything like crazy algorithm, don't worry about that, but we're trying to figure out what we believe it'll sell for. Typically think about this. It's like, cool, this appraiser said it's worth 200. This real estate agent thinks they can sell it for 210. This other investor that we know says they base theirs off 190, blah, blah, blah. We take all this information. I'm not trying to overcomplicate this, so there's not like a crazy formula to do that, but we're gonna take all that information and then we're going to figure out what we're comfortable lending based on how well they execute. There's no crazy, like I said, there's no crazy formula or algorithm. Use what you're comfortable with and base it off of that, and always be on the cautious side. If you work with a borrower or a client that's done a ton of deals, absolutely you can be more aggressive on it. But especially starting off with some of these a newer borrower, newer client, do what you're comfortable with, okay? That's important. I'm gonna go into depth with this a little bit later. So let me know if you need anything else related to the collateral side, but that's what it is, okay? Figuring out what you're comfortable with, and back into property like that. Typically condos, we like to reduce LTVs a little bit, and the reason why is typical of the condo fees. We know condos, when things go bad, are usually the first one to go. And think about, if you got to own one of these properties, even if a condo is free and clear, it's not free and clear because you got a high condo fee and taxes that you're responsible for every month. So there's a lot of areas outside of our area in the DC area that these condos are only worth like 50 or 60 grand because they have $800 condo association fees. It's hard for us to wrap our brain around doing that deal, because even if 100% the deal was paid off, let's say we had to take back the property, let's say it was our own money, there was no private investor in it, we had to take back the property, we're still stuck with $800 a month between the condo fee and the taxes. So it's just, they're tough to wrap our brains out. So suburbia or an area that is easy to value always works. If you're in a city, try to stay as honed in as possible. You need to know these areas. We talked about this 100 times earlier. We only lend locally because we know local. And we're not looking to expand into other markets because we don't know the other markets. We know local. There's enough business in every city to do these types of deals, but you got to understand the market. You got to learn the market. And if you don't know it, that's okay. You got to learn it. And there's no better way to learn than go out to properties as you're getting calls and meeting people and utilizing local resources to help. So that's the 4 C's. I'll touch up on the collateral afterwards. After this, I'll have on my computer. So some third-party providers that you need access to. Obviously, you need access to a title company. The title company is going to give you a title commitment. Whoever does the title cannot do your loan docs. We're going to talk about that in kind of the preparing for closing and working with an attorney to do your loan documents. But conflict of interest, you don't want the person doing the title doing your docs. The person that's doing the title, that's giving you a title commitment, that's giving you title insurance, their job is not to necessarily protect you. Their job is to protect themselves. Your attorney will help you with getting the best title commitment as possible. Typically, what happens is a title commitment comes out, your title attorney yourself reviews it and says, no, I don't want this, can you give me this endorsement if you can? And then you work with the title company, and most of the time they're like, sure, we can do it that way. So having a third-party title insurance company is good. Insurance, okay, so there's 3 types of insurance, and obviously you need the right one in place, because if not, and a fire happens or something goes wrong, they're not going to pay out. So you have a vacant policy. So if you're doing like a bridge loan on a vacant building or vacant property, vacant insurance is good. The most common one is builder's risk with liability. So let's say you're doing an acquisition and construction loan for somebody, which is typically what we do, these rehab loans on almost all of these deals. They'll get a builder's risk and insurance policy. The way that those work is you get a builder's risk policy, which covers all the material of the property, and it does all the hazard and stuff like that. So if the house burns down, and then you also have the liability side of things. So the reason that liability is important is someone slips and falls, a contractor, you go to show the house, someone comes in, the liability part comes into place on that. The other insurance policy is a tenant policy. Now, sophisticated real estate investors sometimes will try to trick you into allowing them to get a tenant policy, and the reason why is a tenant policy is the cheapest policy to get. But if something really happens, they probably won't pay it out. So, and the reason it's cheap is because somebody's living there. Someone's taking care of the property. So make sure, unless it's a rental property and clearly occupied by a tenant, that you're not getting that. You want a builder's risk. And most of these deals, these flip houses, you want builder's risk and liability. Okay, so valuation. So I'll tell you the way we set, we'll go through the transition of when we started, what we had, and what we have now, and then you can make a decision of what works best for you for a valuation. So remember, they pay up front, the borrower pays the $400, okay? You want to get some sort of valuation. Now, I believe that the valuations that you get are just getting used as a resource. You don't necessarily want to rely on that particular value that comes in, but it is good to have. Keep in mind, you need to have transparency with your private investors, and sometimes it's good to have a third-party valuation of this property as well, and not just hearsay of like, hey, this property is worth $200,000. So it's good to have a third-party valuation in place. We don't typically like to get appraisers. We like to get real estate agents that know those areas. We feel like that's better than an appraiser. So we had, when we got started, we had about 4 or 5 different real estate agents. We paid them $200 to do an evaluation for us, and I'll give you get a copy of what's in it. It's just 2 pages. Tells you what the as-is value is, the after repair value, what approximate what the construction costs are. What else does it have in there? And then 3 active comps, 3 recently closed comps is in that, and that's useful. You got to go out and go out yourself and look at the property, but you should also have them go out and look at the property, let them take pictures for you, put it in this report. Typically, the going rate for that, that's typically what you're getting is like a BPO, broker's price opinion. We just call it a valuation because that's what works best for us. Typical, depending on where you are in the country, $85 to $125 is the going cost for one of those. The reason that we pay $200 is because we're already collecting the money up front, but more importantly, we want that done quick. Time is money. You got to move as soon as that deal gets committed, you got to get title work ordered that day. So as soon as title work is done, you can close. Like that's the way you got to do that, create a business. Now, when you're just getting started, obviously, push it out a little bit more time to make sure you have the capital lined up. But as you grow, these deals need to close quick. So the reason we charge the $200 or that we pay out the $200 is to try to get this real estate agent to do it the same day or the next day, right? So also that same person will be doing the construction inspections on the back end, and we'll get to that as we talk about kind of the back end of the transaction, and we pay out $150 to do that. So as you grow, you might want to consider, right now we have like an in-house evaluator in-house, so pretty much every day they're on the road doing inspections and valuations for us up front. So just something to think about as you grow the model. But the valuations are important because it's just a third party going into the property on your behalf, looking at the property, looking at pictures, things like that. Okay, so those are typically the third party resources. If you're doing a bigger commercial deal, I wouldn't recommend it unless you're comfortable with it, but obviously you want to do your phase 1 environmentals, your additional surveys, some other attorney work and things like that. But those are, I guess credit reporting agency. Make sure you can obviously pull credit. We don't typically like to rely on the borrower's own credit score or our own credit bureaus. We like to pull our own. So make sure you can go to like Kroll Factual Data and get in on that. All right, so let's jump into the borrower and the guarantor. So you can lend money to a few different parties. To the borrower's personal name if you want, an entity. Typically, investors would want like an S corp or an LLC. 95% of the stuff, 99 probably is an LLC or a self-directed IRA. You can lend money to as well. So we'll go through all those. The personal name, obviously, pretty self-explanatory. So the borrower would be the borrower would be James Smith, right? Their personal name. Depending on what state you're in, sometimes it's a good idea if it's a marital state to get the wife or a spouse to guarantee the loan as well, because if you want to go after them with a judgment if the deal goes bad, if you're in a marital state, you need to get them to sign, or if not, you can't go after any marital assets. In our business, we actually don't do that. We try not to have to utilize judgments at all on some of these deals. We're hoping, the goal is to have the collateral to be self-sufficient, so we don't ask the spouse to sign. And also, most bigger investors probably aren't going to go for the deal if their spouse needs to sign. But again, we have done that. When we started out, we did have spouses sign. So again, it just depends on what you want. So if you're lending to an entity, an LLC, the documents that you're going to need is you're going to need the operating agreement, you're going to need a certificate of good standing, you're going to need their EIN number, and their articles of organization. So those are typically the 4 things that you need. So what would happen is, let's say, Global LLC is the borrower. So they're the buyer of the property, they're the borrower, Global LLC, and then John Smith is a 50% borrower, and let's say his wife, Jane Smith, is the other 50% borrower. They would both be the guarantor. So the borrower is the LLC, and the guarantors are the members of the LLC. I would make a very good practice of anybody who is a member to sign as a guarantor. Make them guarantee the deal with you. Make them guarantee the deal. Anyone who's a member, most entities have 1 or 2 members. Sometimes you're going to come across one that, hey, this LLC is, this LLC owns 50%, and this person owns 10%. This person owns 10%. Let the attorney that's doing your loan documents, chances are they can help you with some of that stuff. Like, don't freak out and be overcomplicated with this. It's not a big deal. But any rule of thumb, anyone who's signing or anyone who's a part of the entity, make them sign a guarantee as well. So one thing that we do that I know a lot of other hard money lenders don't do, but this is a great way to capture a good piece of the market that's out there, is lend to a self-directed IRA. Now, how do you potentially do this? Well, for the most part, you can lend anything, right? So let's say the self-directed IRA name, let's say it's with a company called like Equity Trust, because that's a popular one. So what would happen would be Equity Trust Company, Custodian, FBO, Jason Balin IRA, right? Let's say that's the name. This guy buys the property under that name. He needs a loan. You do a loan to that IRA for them to purchase the property. So you may say, okay, well, I heard that if you buy a property in a self-directed IRA, it's a non-recourse loan. They can't personally guarantee it. Well, that's accurate. But again, that's okay. So let me ask you a question. Would you rather loan, let's say it's a $100,000 asset. Would you rather loan $65,000 to me or with a personal guarantee, or would you rather loan $50,000 to my entity or my self-directed IRA without a personal guarantee? Take the extra equity. It's more valuable than the guarantee to begin with. Rule of thumb when you lend to self-directed IRAs is 50% or lower. We try to stick around that 40% mark. So I have no problem lending to somebody without a personal guarantee at lower exposure, at a lower LTV. And that can even be to that personal name. If you want to, I look at that as, if you're going to lend to someone with really bad credit, chances are they don't have anything anyways besides the property. Lower your exposure, lower the LTV, and then who cares about the guarantee? So just think about that, a little bit, because that works. So we're getting several deals off the self-directed IRAs regularly because a bank's not going to do that. A national institutionally backed lender is not going to do that. But because we have the flexibility of doing it the way we want, and we don't really care about the guarantee at a lower LTV, we're willing to do that. So it's a good way, especially when you're starting out. We talked about going to meetup groups and real estate investment association groups. You go in there and say, hey, I'm a private lender and I'll lend to a self-directed IRA who wants to flip a house. You're going to get hands raised and you're going to get business off of that alone. Just keep in mind you want to be at that 50% or less. Cool. So that's the bar and the guarantee side of stuff. Some of this stuff's going to overlap on what docs to get in your package when we talk about preparing for closing, which we're going to do in our next video. But okay, so part of this underwriting process is organizing all the docs, and I have a checklist for you as well. But I'm going to go through some of the docs that you need. Now, keep in mind, when you organize docs, you got to treat this like a business and make sure you're being as organized as possible. So what we do is we have a Google Drive, and every deal has its own folder in the Google Drive. So it's, in that particular case, Global LLC would be the name, and then the guarantor's name after that, and then the property address, 123 Main Street. And that's how we organize everything. And how everything completely goes, everything, all the files, all the docs associated with that go into that folder. You want to be as organized as possible. You want to label everything properly. If it's a loan application, label it a loan application. If you upload something from a server, rename it and label it. I know that sounds stupid, but you're not going to be the only one looking at this file. You're looking, and keep in mind, you may have to look at this file in 2 years from now, and you want to make sure you know exactly what every document is. More importantly, typically the staff members or private investors of yours are going to be looking at this exact same file, and you want to be able to keep everything as organized as possible so everyone knows exactly what's what. So this is what typically goes in a file that you need for underwriting into any deal. You need a loan application, and you need your loan application. You need all the LLC docs. You need the credit report. You need the asset statement. Now, we don't typically ask for many financials, but we do ask for an asset statement. And the main reason is I want to make sure they have enough money to the table. And if they need $40,000 cash to close, I want to make sure they have $40,000 cash to close. So we ask for that just to make sure they have it, right? I don't like going to the closing table and wiring $100,000 out and the borrower not having the $40,000 cash to close, or whatever the case is. So the asset statement, the insurance. We do not close loans until the insurance is 100% in place. Oh, let me talk about one other thing with the insurance. So on the insurance policy, The borrower's name, exactly how it's going to be deeded, is the insured, and we're the lost payee, or the mortgagee. The mortgagee lost payee on the policy, which is our company name and our address. So before we do anything, that has to be done, and it's got to be prepaid. The reason the insurance always has to get prepaid is, think about this. Most of the time you're like, okay, cool, well, it's getting collected on the closing. Well, guess what happens? We collect $750, the insurance company does, on the HUD. Everything's closed, and the check forgets to get mailed out from the title company to the insurance company. And then all of a sudden the insurance gets canceled, no payment. I bring this up because this has happened before. So it is important to make sure it gets prepaid with a credit card ahead of time, right when it's closing, ahead of time at the closing, to make sure there's no insurance complications. Okay, so insurance is in the file. What else we have? I don't have that checklist in front of me, but title work, the loan docs. We're going to talk about loan docs when we talk about preparing for closing. The ratified contract on the property. The other thing we like to put in place to document it is, I like to document the borrower's strategy of what they plan to do. It could help. Think about this. You're preparing an underwriting file to obviously make sure you have everything in place to make sure you're making a good decision, but you're also mapping a strategy in case a deal starts going sideways and goes bad and you have to go foreclose on it and you have to go in court to protect yourself. You have all of those things in place as well. So it's just something to think about. The more information you have, the better. We like to be, and keep in mind, our private investors have access to everything that we have access to. We want to be transparent. Everything we have, they have. But we try to get as much information as possible. The more you have in file, the better. Also, during the origination and scripting part, there was an LOI, and like a lending intent and an estimated use of funds. With like good faith estimate, put that in there as well. All the information, the more the better. When someone in my office comes to me and says, "Hey, I have a question on this file," I can go onto our Google Docs and I can pull up the file at any time. I mean, deals we've done 10 years ago, and be like, "Okay, cool, here it is right here," or "We didn't get this, or here's the answer." Keep it organized. I know that sounds dumb, but like, keep it organized. You're going to get busy, and there's going to be deals that come in all the time. So make sure you have that, and I'll get you the underwriting checklist as well. That's at the bottom of this video, so you can have access to all that. All right, cool. So that's pretty much underwriting. There's a big chunk that obviously have somewhat left out that we're going to talk about in a sec, related to the comps and determining value. That's probably one of the most important things. Now, again, I would encourage you, the person watching this video, to probably be the one that's going to be doing this stuff. That's the important part. I don't want to rely on someone else to tell me what the value of the property is, because again, I could flip a house, Chris could flip a house, you could flip a house, your partner could flip a house. We'd all sell it for different prices. So you need to figure out not only what, and again, it comps. Oh, cool. Hey, it comps at 200. That doesn't mean that it's going to sell for 200. The comps are a resource, just like anything else. Okay, so let's walk over to my computer, and I'll do a screenshot of why and how we comp properties and determining value. Okay, hey guys, how you doing? Jason at Harmony Bankers. Just shared my screen. This is our local MLS that we have access to, and we're going to pull some comps in a second. A few things that kind of want to show you is, you got to do whatever you can to try to get access to your local MLS. I'm in my local MLS right here, and it's so important. Obviously, you can go on Zillow, you can pull state and assessment and taxation values and things like that. You can talk to real estate agents and appraisers and stuff like that. But I live on this stuff. Typically, I'm comping about 10 properties every day. It's important to look on this stuff. Like we talked about earlier, for every 100 leads, opportunities, contacts we get, that turns into like 10 potential deals, and then one ends up closing. So for the most part, so I'm looking at as much as I can on a regular basis. And I want to read, I pulled this up on this other screen right here, some different variables to consider when pulling comps. And I think this is really important. And we'll go through this as we talk, but you need to understand the market conditions, your neighbor's house. Is there any crazy barking dogs? What is the neighbor's house condition? Is the house behind power lines? Are you on a double yellow line street? Square footage, beds, bath, basement, year built, floor plan, style, quality of the upgrades, original builder, schools. Is it brick or is it siding? The elevation, is it a walkout? Is there a bunch of stairs? Do you walk down? Elevation is important. Does the house face or back up to anything? Is it in and out of the subdivision? And obviously recent activity that's happened in the neighborhood. So all things. So my sales rep just sent me this one property. Actually, I have two right here that we're going to comp real quick. Some real active live deals. So the first thing I do is type this into tax record, right? First important thing, type it into tax record. I have the tax record up here. This is an area right outside of Washington, D.C. suburbs. It's a median housing price neighborhood, so it's good for our model. So this one ends up having a subdivision, which makes it easier sometimes in a polygon or a radius search, depending on how many comps there's going to be. So what I'll do is I'll typically copy that. I usually print this out, or I'll open it up into a new screen. So let's just open up to a new screen real quick. Cool. I like to open that up to have that side by side as I'm pulling comps. Come on, let's open. Cool. So a few other things I look at is what's assessed at land and improvement. Not that the assessed value is all that important in this particular area, but I do like to look at that. I like to look at previous sales. This particular deal, it's a NU townhouse, 1160 square feet. Actually, before I do that, before we look at comps, I'm also going to do Google Map View. And I also like to put it into Zillow to see if there's any additional comments in Zillow that wasn't picked up somewhere else. So there's Zillow. Cool. So this is your typical semi-detached house in a decent neighborhood. The good part about this, like I said, it's in a subdivision, and a lot of the other properties are very similar to this. So these are two properties, one property, two property. Zillow has this assessed. Some areas that I'm in, Zillow is really high and some areas are really low. My guess is there's a lot of like as is lower end properties, unrehabbed properties. Because 160 is probably going to be on the low side for the estimate, but don't take too much attention to that. Okay. So let me take this from the tax record. I'm going to put that into, this is the way I do a search. Close date. Let's see. For sale, the county. So all I do is county, active, under contract, contingent, sold, everything within the last 180 days. There's going to be too many actually right here. Oops, did I do that wrong? There we go. Let's do 360 real quick. Cool. Okay. So as you can see, lower end properties, this is our subject property right here. It's on the market for 152, by the way. The good part is all these are the exact same living area, which makes it easy. 1160. So the high is 250 minus 5, 250, seller subsidy, $5,000, so net 245. And this is a nice full renovation. Really nice full renovation. So 245 is the high comp. Here's another one. Nice renovation. Ooh, so here's one. 220 minus 6. 214. That looks nicer than it is, I think. Okay. I'm going to do one other thing real quick. I'm going to take out the subdivision and just do a polygon search. Let me take that out. Let's just do a search like right here. Or let's just do a radius search. Let's take those out. And I'm going to take all the detached houses out since it's semi-detached. And the reason I want to do that is I want to hone in to like 90 days. Cool. Those similar ones right here. Okay. All right. So rule of thumb on this particular case, You know what? I'm going to put this legal, let me put that back in at 180 days. Because this is the exact subdivision, same school system, everything. Cool. Okay. So my mind would tell me, okay, let me give you a little bit more information from the borrower that he sent me. 640 credit score, repeat borrower. We did 2 deals with them. They have $60K cash available and a little bit of experience. So I'm gonna go with like a 240 exit. That's what I feel comfortable with. These really nice ones we're selling for 250, but I like the 240. The 640 credit's not great. This is an area that you can't screw up too much. So it's 640 or 240. We would lend 156. So 155, and the renovation's 30 grand. So 155 minus 30. So the way that that's set up is they're buying it for 150. It needs 30 grand of work. We're lending 155. So remember what we talked about earlier? You're going to take 155 is the purchase price. Or I'm sorry, 150 is the purchase price. 30 is the rehab. Add 10% for your points, closing costs, other stuff. And that's 10% of your loan amount, which is 155 is your loan amount that we talked about. So that's 15.5 comes out to 195.5 minus 155 loan amount. So then you're going to need $40,000 cash to close. And remember, the 155 loan amount, 65% of 240. That's what we're comfortable with. So they'll need 40 grand cash to close. So I'll email him that back real quick. And we'll move on to the next one. So that was a pretty easy property to comp. There was a lot very similar. Look, these are all Bookers, right? Ours was 836 Booker. These are pretty easy ones to comp. And if you're unsure, just lower the loan amount or lower the ARV, lower the loan amount. All these were very, very similar. Okay, so let's do another one. 9, 5. This one's actually pretty close to our office in Columbia, Maryland. Saddlebag Row. I'm not sure right where this is, but it's got to be close. Okay. Just trying to find the tax record. There it is. Okay. So in this particular area, there's no subdivision, which usually most suburban areas have subdivisions. This one just doesn't because Columbia in general is kind of the subdivision. All right, so let's put this property in Zillow. Tax record. Okay. Cool. So single family auction. Let's see what we got. Makes it nice when there's a lot of tall trees around there. Okay. So this is that property right there. Okay. So found that. A few things I'm going to look at is the tax assessed value. Again, I don't necessarily go off of any of these things. I just like to know the history, right? So this was foreclosed on at 225 from Carrington Mortgage. These people had a loan of 318, or maybe not a loan, but they bought it for 318 in 2006. And Carrington Mortgage took it back. There's no basement. That's important. This is the square footage, units, things like that. So typical, I don't even know what you would call this house. It's kind of like, I don't know what, I guess it's kind of like a colonial without a garage. It's just a 2-story house, I guess. So, okay, I'm going to open up this tax record. And I'm going to do this. Let's do 180 again. This is in Howard County, Maryland. Okay. Cool. So this is where we're at. Our office is right here, by the way, on the map. Okay. So I could do radius. I'm probably going to do Polygon because I want to stay kind of in this subdivision right around here. All right, let's start with that. I don't want to go further at Oakland Mills or Stevens Forts. Let's see how many comps we have in this area. Hopefully there's like 12. Hold on one sec. There we go. Doing that sign wrong. Okay, so this is a good amount, which is perfect. Okay, so this thing was 1320 square feet, single family. Let me just do all the. We already did detached. Good. What was that address again? 9536 Saddlebrag. Okay, this one's not on the market. So they claim they're buying it for 220. So let me try to find, let's start down here. So here's one probably similar to size. Full renovation, sold at 375 in June. It's 1200 with no basement, right? Or 1320, no basement. Okay. Not many of these. It looks like a lot of these don't have basements. So I'm going to try to find like a really close one. This one is very close. Yeah. That's kind of a funky property. The problem with this particular area, there's a lot of different villages, and there's a weird. The subdivisions are called like villages. Oakland Mills Village, the village of Wild Lake. It's funky. So this one's similar, but then it has this garage thing right here, and this is at 315. Really point. Let me see if I can open this up for you guys. See if that's better. There we go. That one's better. So let's find a house that looks like it. So this kind of, but then this has like a garage over it. This is a superior house. Maybe something like this. That's a bank owned for 212. There's a good one, 299. Nice livable house, sold for 300 very, very quickly. Days on market was under 2 months. That's a very good comp right there. Here's another one, 330. That one's not fully renovated either, but it's nice livable. This one's 344. Here's a good one, 365. This might be a little bit bigger. So kind of I have in my head that about 340 resale is probably the number. This one's got that carport, a little bit additional square footage, 387. So this is a good way to look at it quickly. I know these areas pretty well, and you're going to learn all your areas pretty well too. But it looks like the cheapest thing that's ever sold over here is 205. The most expensive 443 for something way bigger, which is like a big colonial. We're in like the 340 mark. So let's take 340, put that into your calculator or in your head, 340. That gives us a loan amount of 220. Right? Minus 40 in construction, because the renovation is 40 in construction. So we're going to lend 180 on day one, which is a great day one. The cheapest day one here is 200. And as the property is fully renovated, we'll be in it at 220 when it's fully done, because 180 plus 40 is 220. So, and remember, we came up with an ARV of 340, 65% is 220. I forgot to tell you, this guy had like 640 credit as well. I'd like to be a little bit higher. I'm a little aggressive on this one for two reasons. Number one, I know this area. Number two, this is an area that you can't mess up too much, and it's really close to our office. So if no one's giving away a property here. You know, someone's going to execute and do a good job on it, even if they don't do the best construction. It's just not an area that you can mess up too much. So there's a lot of demand right in that, and that just goes from market knowledge, and you're going to learn the market as well just from being involved.
That's why stick to your area that you know really well, close by, your office, your house, someplace you know, and expand as you learn and as you grow on this. This thing's 2 miles from our office. Very easy property value. So let's just do the numbers on that. They're buying it at 222, 40,000 in work, closing costs based off 220. Let's just say 10% is 22,000. Our loans, so that's 284 minus 220 loan amount. So 64 grand cash close. It's a lot of cash to close. The reason it is it's not a great deal. They're buying it at 222, $40,000 in work, plus they're paying closing costs, which was $22,000. Plus, let's say they make 6 months worth of payments at 13 or 14%. That's, let's see, so 284, that's another 15,000. So right now they're at 295, assuming they don't have other issues. So 340 gross. Let's say you have 5% real estate fees plus 1.5% transfer and rec, so 6.5%. So that's another 22 grand. So 340 minus 22,000 in selling costs is 318 minus 195 in upfront for everything. Shoot, messed that up. 340, 6.5% minus 195. So you have a spread of about 20, 25 grand, assuming nothing goes wrong, which isn't awful. This is a hard area to get deals under contract in. So that's it. I mean, nothing too crazy. In my next videos, we're going to talk about getting to closing and taking this to the next level. Like, what do you do after you pull comps? What do you do after all of this stuff's completed? Like, what are the next steps in this process? But that's how I pull comps. It's not crazy. I pull a tax record and then I try to get the best sample size I can on this. So you can do a polygon search. You can do radius search. You can do a square search. You can do a neighborhood search. If we do stuff, inside an inner city, we may do block by block. If we're right here, I'm going to see if there's a big enough sample size, right in this general area. Oops. So cool. So that's how I pull comps. Nothing too crazy. It's going to take you about 5 or 10 minutes to do each one. That's just the rule of thumb. Do as much research as you can. Much research as you can. You want to dissect all of this stuff and figure out what you're comfortable with. Again, what I didn't tell you about that Columbia, Maryland one, that was a repeat borrower as well. So that made it a little bit easier knowing that I know how they perform. You got to figure out how well they're going to perform and base everything off of that. Again, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with a 340 ARV. I'm comfortable with a 290 ARV, and you base 65% off that. That's how it works. All right, so we're going to take you through the closing process coming up next. Okay, so